Hi, I'm Kinsley. I'm 36, and last month, my neighbor called me at midnight saying strangers were inside my new house. The house my husband didn't even know existed. I checked the cameras, and what I saw, it changed everything I believed about trust, marriage, and safety. Before I tell you what I saw that night, let me take you back to how it all began. Where are you watching from? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more revenge and emotional courage stories. It started almost a year before that call, in a quiet stretch of summer where I found myself scrolling through house listings late at night while my husband, Thomas, snored beside me. We'd been married 12 years, and those 12 years felt more like survival than love. On the outside, Thomas was polite, charming, even helpful to our neighbors. But behind closed doors, everything changed. It wasn't physical. It was the kind of control that came with quiet words disguised as care. He'd question every purchase, every phone call, every plan. If I bought a new dress, he'd say, "Don't you already have one that looks like that?" If I called a friend, he'd ask, "Why do you need to talk to her so much?" It was always small, but it chipped away at me, piece by piece. One night, while he was away on a work trip, I came across a small white farmhouse listing on a real estate site about 40 minutes outside our town. It wasn't fancy. The paint was chipped, the porch tilted a little, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't seen a renovation in decades. But something about it felt mine. The ad said, "Quiet neighborhood, needs love, perfect for someone starting over." I remember staring at that line for minutes. Starting over. That was exactly what I wanted. Not a mansion, not a perfect life, just peace. The next morning, I called the realtor. I didn't tell Thomas. I told her my name was Kinsley Avery, using my maiden name. I opened a new checking account, using savings I'd been quietly setting aside for years, money I told Thomas I'd used for family bills. It wasn't just a house I was buying. It was my escape plan. By then, our marriage had turned into quiet, sharp arguments that never truly ended. He'd criticize my cooking, my job, even my laugh. One night he said, "You'd never make it on your own. You need me." I smiled, pretending not to care. But that night, I promised myself he'd never get to say that again. The house became my secret comfort. I'd drive there on weekends under the excuse of visiting a friend from work. The drive itself became therapy. The open road, the quiet fields, the long stretches of calm that reminded me I could breathe. The first time I unlocked the door, I just stood there, frozen. The air smelled of dust and old wood, sunlight spilling through broken blinds. It was imperfect, but it was free. I ran my hand along the chipped banister, the faded wallpaper, and whispered, "You're mine now." I took pictures of every corner, the rusty sink, the cracked tiles, the creaky staircase. Each one felt like a promise. For months, I started fixing it up, little by little, a weekend of painting, another for cleaning. I bought secondhand furniture from thrift stores, choosing every piece with care. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, just things that felt like me. And every time I came back to my marital home, the silence between me and Thomas grew louder. He never noticed the paint on my hands or the tiredness in my eyes. He never asked what made me happy anymore, maybe because he didn't really want to know. It was early fall when I finally sat on the porch steps of that little farmhouse with a cup of coffee in my hands, looking out at the trees turning gold. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I had a notebook where I wrote small plans. Replace kitchen sink. Plant roses by the fence. Move here after separation. I even kept a spare toothbrush in the bathroom. A silly, small thing, but symbolic. Sometimes I'd talk out loud in the empty rooms. "Someday, this'll be my living room. And that old rug, yeah, you'll go right there." I'd smile at myself for sounding crazy. But it wasn't crazy. It was hope in disguise. That night, before leaving, I installed a small security camera above the front porch. It wasn't fancy, just one of those motion-activated ones I bought online. I didn't think much of it, but it gave me comfort knowing I could peek in whenever I missed the place. I told myself it was to watch for raccoons or stray animals. But deep down, I think I just wanted proof that it was real, that the life I was building wasn't a fantasy. By winter, I'd already met with a lawyer about separating from Thomas. Quietly, carefully. I didn't want a messy fight or confrontation. I just wanted out. My lawyer advised me to prepare everything first: documents, finances, housing. I smiled because that last part was already done. I had my house, my backup plan, and for once, I felt like I was one step ahead. But secrets have a strange weight. Even when they're good ones, they press against your chest. I remember one night, Thomas sat beside me watching TV, and he reached over to hold my hand, something he hadn't done in months. He said softly, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" For a split second, I almost told him everything about the farmhouse, about my plan to leave. But then he smiled, that smile that never reached his eyes. And I lied. "I'm fine." Inside, I wasn't fine. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once. That night, I lay awake thinking how close I'd come to ruining it. I couldn't risk it, not when I was so close to being free. It happened about a week after I signed the final paperwork. The house was officially mine. I hadn't moved in yet, but I'd visit on weekends, keeping everything low-key. That night, I was home, the old home, when my phone buzzed around 11:48 p.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have bought that place." I sat up immediately. My first thought was that it was a scam, but the message had my exact address. My new address. No one knew that address except the realtor and me. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. I checked my security app. No motion alerts, nothing. Just silence. The next day, I drove to the farmhouse earlier than planned. Everything looked normal. My potted plant still on the porch, my key still hidden under the loose brick step. But something felt off. I couldn't place it at first, but then I noticed the front door wasn't fully latched. It was slightly open. I froze. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but curiosity won. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning. The air inside smelled faintly of cigarettes. No one I knew smoked. I walked through every room. Nothing missing, nothing moved, just that strange, lingering smell. When I got to the kitchen, I found something on the counter that didn't belong to me: a half-empty water bottle. No label, no brand, just there. My hands trembled as I picked it up with a napkin and tossed it in the trash. I convinced myself it was a worker who came by mistake, maybe the realtor showing someone else the property before the papers cleared. But that night, lying in bed beside Thomas again, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my house, the one no one was supposed to know about. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into work, into chores, into pretending life was fine. But secrets have a way of whispering when you're alone. One afternoon, I stopped by the farmhouse to drop off a small rug I'd bought. The front porch light, the one I'd never turned on, was glowing. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I checked my phone app again. No new alerts, no video recordings. The motion sensor was on, yet somehow nothing had been captured. That night, I replaced the old camera with a new one. This one streamed directly to my phone in real time. I sat in my car, testing it, making sure it worked. Everything seemed fine. A few days later, as snow began to fall, I got a text from the realtor. "Congratulations again, Kinsley. You got a great deal on that place." Something about that word, deal, made me pause. Had she mentioned the house to anyone? When I asked casually if she'd told anyone about my purchase, she said, "No, of course not. Just filed the sale with your husband's accountant, as required for joint financial transparency." My stomach dropped. She had sent the paperwork to Thomas's accountant, which meant Thomas now had access to every detail. That's when I realized my secret wasn't safe anymore. I didn't know what he would do with that information, but deep down, a small voice whispered that I was about to find out. The morning after I moved in, the air around my new house felt oddly heavy, like it was holding a secret it wasn't ready to share. I had barely finished unpacking a few boxes when my phone started vibrating on the kitchen counter. I didn't recognize the number. For a moment, I thought it was one of those delivery calls I'd been expecting. "Hello," I answered, still half distracted, tugging at the tape, sealing a box of dishes. A shaky voice replied, "Is this Kinsley? You're the new owner of the house on Brookhill Lane, right?" I froze. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Carol," the voice said, her tone trembling slightly. "I live right across the street. I think we spoke briefly when you came to sign the papers with the realtor." I vaguely remembered a woman with silver hair waving from her porch that day. But now, her voice carried something that made my heart race, a warning disguised as concern. "I don't mean to alarm you," she continued, "but are you home right now?" I looked around, the morning light cutting sharp lines across the floor. "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" There was a pause, long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then Carol whispered, "Because I just saw two people walk into your house." For a second, my brain refused to process it. "I'm sorry, what?" "They went around the back. I thought maybe you knew them, but they didn't use the door." The words hit me like cold water. My hand gripped the counter so tightly that my knuckles went white. I didn't invite anyone," I said, voice cracking slightly. "Then you should probably check your cameras," Carol said softly, "and maybe call someone." My heart was pounding now. I'd installed a small Wi-Fi camera in the living room just 2 nights ago. A precaution. My husband, Ethan, didn't know about this house, and part of me had felt uneasy even before moving in. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app. For a few agonizing seconds, the feed loaded. Then the living room came into view. And she was right. 2 figures, hooded, moving cautiously, were inside. They weren't stealing. They weren't breaking things. They were looking around, like they knew exactly where they were. One of them pointed toward the kitchen, the same direction where I was standing. I backed away from the window, trying to keep my breathing quiet. Every sound in the house suddenly felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, even my heartbeat. "Carol," I whispered into the phone. "They're here. I can see them on camera." "Oh, dear Lord," she muttered. "Do you want me to call the police?" "Yes. No, wait," I said, torn. "I need to be sure who they are first." I slowly inched toward the front door, peeking through the small side window. Across the street, Carol stood frozen on her porch, clutching her own phone, eyes wide. Our gaze met for a split second, and she nodded, urging me to act. I took a deep breath, opened the door quietly, and stepped outside. My car was parked a few feet away. If I could just make it there, I could drive to the nearest station. But something in me hesitated. Why were they here? Who even knew about this place? Only 2 people, my realtor and my friend Mia, knew about the house. Not even Ethan. Unless... My phone buzzed again. This time, a notification from the camera app. Motion detected, living room. I opened the app. The 2 figures were now standing in front of my framed photos, pictures of me alone, ones I'd brought from my old apartment. One of them turned slightly, and even though the hood shadowed most of their face, I saw something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone familiar. The posture, the way they moved, it looked like Ethan. I blinked hard, convincing myself I was mistaken. But then the other person removed their hood. Mia, my best friend. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the porch. Carol's voice called faintly through the speaker. "Kinsley, are you okay? What's happening?" I couldn't answer. My world had tilted sideways. Why would they be here, together, in my secret house? My thoughts tangled into chaos as I grabbed the phone again. "Carol," I said, my voice breaking, I think I know them." "Then call them out," she said. "Make them leave." But how could I? If Ethan knew about this place, it meant he'd been keeping track of me. And if Mia was with him, it meant they'd been keeping secrets, together. I sank onto the porch step, staring at the house that had once felt like a dream. Now, it looked different, darker. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My mind replayed every recent conversation, every small lie Ethan had told, the sudden late meetings, the unreturned calls, the strange look in his eyes when I mentioned buying something for myself. He must have found out. And he wasn't alone. I clenched my jaw and stood up. Enough hiding. If they were here to confront me, they'd have to do it face to face. I walked back to the door, turned the knob slowly, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Ethan?" I called out, trying to sound calm. "Mia?" No answer. I moved toward the living room, each step careful, my pulse hammering. The faint smell of cologne lingered in the air, the same kind Ethan wore. I glanced around. The framed photos were still on the shelf. But something was off. One of them had been turned face down. I picked it up. My fingers trembled as I saw the photo. It was from last year's anniversary. Ethan and I, smiling under the summer sun. A message was scribbled on the back in ink. "You shouldn't have hidden this." The penmanship was unmistakable. Ethan's. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could process it, Carol's voice startled me from behind. "Kinsley!" I turned sharply. She was standing at the door, breathing heavily, holding something in her hand. "I called the police," she said. "They're on their way." I wanted to thank her, but my throat felt dry. "They're gone now," I whispered. I think they knew I was watching. Carol looked uneasy. "I told you, strange things have been happening around this street lately. People coming and going from that house even before it was sold. Maybe they thought it was still empty." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. The lights would turn on at night. Sometimes I'd see shadows moving through the windows. But when I called the property agent, they said no one had access. A shiver crawled up my arms. "You're saying people were already inside this house before I bought it?" She nodded. "That's why I was worried when I saw you moving in alone." I exhaled slowly, trying to piece everything together. Ethan had never liked the idea of me having something that was entirely mine. He always wanted control, subtle but constant. He'd mocked my dream of owning a quiet home away from the noise. Now, standing there with Carol, I felt a new kind of dread. Maybe he hadn't just found out. Maybe he'd known all along. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers, calm and professional. They searched every corner but found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing missing. "Are you sure you saw someone inside?" one of them asked gently. "Yes," I said firmly. "I have camera footage." They took my statement and left soon after, promising to follow up. When they were gone, I sat on the couch, watching the empty feed on my phone. The house was silent again, but that silence no longer felt peaceful. Carol offered to stay the night, but I told her I'd be fine. I wasn't sure if that was true. As darkness settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were listening. Every creak made me flinch. Every flicker of the light made me glance over my shoulder. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Carol. It was a text from Ethan. "We need to talk. I know where you are." My blood ran cold. He knew. He'd always known. And suddenly, I realized the intruders hadn't come to steal anything. They'd come to send a message. That my secret was never really mine. I turned off the lights, sat by the window, and watched the empty street. Carol's house light was still on, a small beacon in the dark. But inside my home, the dream I bought in silence, nothing felt safe anymore. The glow of my phone screen lingered like a ghost in the darkness. The last message still burned into my eyes. "We need to talk. I know where you are." I sat there frozen, staring at those words until the screen dimmed. For a long moment, I couldn't even breathe. The sound of my heartbeat was the only thing breaking the silence. He knew. Ethan knew where I was. That house, my one private dream, my sanctuary, wasn't a secret anymore. I thought about blocking his number, but something stopped me. If I did, it would mean cutting myself off from the only person who could tell me what was really going on. And as much as I wanted to run, I needed answers more than I needed safety. I typed back with shaking fingers. "How did you find out?" The dots blinked for what felt like an eternity. Then came his reply, "Because it was never really yours." A chill crept through my spine. I set the phone down slowly, staring at the walls that surrounded me. The same walls that had felt warm and welcoming a few days ago now felt like they were hiding something, something that had been watching me long before I ever walked through that door. A soft knock startled me. It wasn't from the front or back. It came from inside. The sound echoed faintly through the hallway, like a hollow thud behind the plaster. I stood up, clutching my phone as a flashlight, and followed the noise. My steps were light, almost hesitant, as if the floor might crumble beneath me. The knocking came again, 2 sharp taps, followed by silence. I pressed my ear to the wall near the staircase. It was faint, but there it was, movement, like someone shifting or brushing against wood. "Hello," I whispered, though I instantly regretted it. No answer. My breath quickened as I stepped back. The house had been inspected before I bought it. There were no crawl spaces, no basements, nothing hidden, or so I thought. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. "You shouldn't have gone there alone." My pulse spiked. I typed furiously. "Why? What's in this house, Ethan?" No reply this time. The quiet stretched out so long it started to hum in my ears. Then, without warning, a section of wallpaper near the stairs shifted, just slightly, like a breath beneath the surface. I froze. Slowly, I reached out and touched it. The paper felt warm. My fingers traced the edges. And that's when I noticed a thin seam, like a door outline I hadn't seen before. I grabbed the corner and pulled gently. It came loose, revealing a small, hidden latch underneath. My heart raced. I didn't want to open it, but I could not. The latch clicked. A narrow panel swung inward, revealing a short, dark passage leading between the walls. Dust floated through the air like gray snowflakes, and a faint, stale smell drifted out. I crouched and shone my flashlight inside. The space was tight, barely enough for one person to move through. I hesitated, then crawled in. The air grew colder with each step. The walls were rough, unfinished wood, marked with faint scratches, as if someone had been here before me. Halfway through, my light caught something glinting on the floor. I reached for it, a small silver key attached to a worn tag. The handwriting was smudged, but I could still make it out. Basement. But there was no basement in this house. At least, that's what I'd been told. I backed out of the crawl space, dusting off my hands, and scanned the floor for any sign of a hatch. I found nothing until I noticed a thin square outline beneath the living room rug. My breath caught. I pushed the rug aside. There it was, a hidden trapdoor, flush with the wooden floor. The key fit perfectly into the lock. When I turned it, the sound was deep and heavy, like it hadn't been opened in years. The hatch lifted with a groan, releasing a wave of cold, musty air that made my skin crawl. A wooden staircase descended into darkness. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You wanted the truth, Kinsley. Go get it." The first few steps creaked under my weight. My flashlight beam trembled against the walls as I descended, revealing what looked like an unfinished cellar. But as I reached the bottom, I realized this wasn't an ordinary basement. The walls were lined with photos, hundreds of them pinned, taped, and stacked in messy clusters. Every photo was of me, at the grocery store, walking to my car, at the cafe, near work, even standing outside my old apartment window at night. My knees went weak, and then I saw it, the most recent one, printed in color. It was me standing right here, in this very house, unpacking boxes. A sound escaped my throat, a small broken gasp. I turned in a slow circle, half expecting someone to be there. But I was alone. Or, at least, I thought I was. The faintest sound, a breath, came from the far corner of the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound stronger than I felt. Nothing. I walked closer, sweeping my light across the wall until it landed on a small wooden chair. And on that chair sat a tablet, its screen still on. I picked it up. The display showed multiple camera feeds, every room in my house, including the crawl space I'd just been in. My throat tightened. Someone had been watching me this whole time. The camera in the living room blinked red, and suddenly the tablet screen flickered. A new feed appeared, grainy but clear enough to make me stumble backward. It was Ethan. He was sitting in what looked like an office, his face tense and shadowed. "Stop looking," he said, his voice low but steady. "Kinsley, please, don't go any further." I froze, gripping the tablet like a lifeline. "How did you get this feed?" I whispered, "Why do you have cameras in my house?" He sighed heavily. "You don't understand. That house, it wasn't listed under your name first. It was part of a property sale my company handled months ago. I kept an eye on it because what?" I snapped. "Because strange things kept happening there," he said. "We had break-ins, power failures, people reporting voices in the walls. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you near it. I thought if I let you buy it quietly, you'd lose interest. But you moved in." I shook my head in disbelief. "You spied on me, Ethan. You tracked me." "I was trying to protect you," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't know what's buried in that place." Before I could respond, a loud thud echoed above me, the sound of a door slamming upstairs. Ethan's eyes widened on the screen. "Kinsley, you're not alone." The tablet went dark. I ran toward the staircase, heart pounding, but when I reached the top, the living room was empty. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Then footsteps. They came from the hallway, slow and deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out again, gripping the nearest object. A lamp as a weapon. A figure appeared at the end of the hall. It wasn't Ethan. It was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, thin, his face pale and drawn. His clothes were covered in dust, like he'd been hiding down there for weeks. He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have opened that door." My voice trembled. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "Someone who lived here long before you did." I backed away. "You broke in. You've been living in my walls." He chuckled softly, almost sadly. "Not living. Waiting." "For what?" I whispered. "For you." My grip tightened around the lamp. Why me? His eyes flicked toward the staircase leading down. Because you found what wasn't meant to be found. Before I could react, he turned and bolted toward the kitchen. I dropped the lamp and chased after him, but when I reached the door, he was gone. No broken window, no open door. Just gone. I stood there shaking, every nerve alive with fear. Then my phone buzzed again. Ethan, get out of there. Now, I didn't need to be told twice. I ran outside, into the cold night air, gasping. Across the street, Carol's porch light was still on. She saw me and rushed over, her face pale. Kinsley, what happened? She asked. There's someone in the house, I said, breathless. A man. He said he'd been here before me. Carol's face changed, something flickering in her eyes. Did he tell you his name? I shook my head. She exhaled shakily. I think I know who he is. The man who built that house disappeared years ago. They never found him. I stared at her, my mind spinning. You're saying he's been here all this time? She looked back toward the dark windows. Maybe not alive in the way you think. A cold wind swept through the yard, and for a split second, I swore I heard that same knocking again, soft, rhythmic, coming from deep inside the walls. I turned to Carol. What do you mean by that? But she didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the house, her expression distant. In that moment, I knew the truth behind those walls wasn't just about Ethan or the cameras or secrets. It was something far older, darker, and closer than I'd ever imagined. And whatever it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't sleep that night. The shadows on the walls felt heavier than ever, stretching like long fingers that refused to let me forget what I had uncovered. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same images, the cracks in the wall, the hidden letters, the truth that had been buried for years. My chest ached with a strange mix of rage and disbelief. When morning finally broke, the light felt harsh, almost mocking. I moved mechanically through the house, each creak of the wooden floor whispering reminders of betrayal. The scent of coffee drifted faintly from the kitchen, but even that familiar comfort couldn't touch the storm building inside me. By noon, I found myself standing at the window, staring out at the road that led away from this cursed house. That's when it hit me. All my life, I'd been running from confrontation. I'd let people walk over me, manipulate me, silence me. But not this time. I didn't plan revenge. It wasn't in my nature. But pain, when left unspoken, becomes something else, something that demands release. So I began quietly. The first thing I did was gather every letter, every note, every hidden piece of truth from behind those walls. I placed them neatly on the table, arranged chronologically as best I could. Each one was like a puzzle piece, cruel, raw, real. My cousin's name appeared more than once, her words laced with deceit and self-justification. I didn't want to believe she was capable of it, but the more I read, the clearer it became. She hadn't just lied. She'd planned everything. The wedding, the catering, the manipulation. All of it was her way of using me, keeping me close enough to control, but far enough to never let me rise. My hands trembled as I reached the last letter. It was signed not by her, but by someone I once trusted, her mother, my aunt. The air left my lungs. The betrayal wasn't just hers. It was a family affair. The next few days passed in silence, but inside me, something shifted. I didn't want revenge for the sake of vengeance. I wanted truth to breathe. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd buried. I started with small things. At first, I returned their calls, polite, calm, composed. My cousin's voice was sweet, rehearsed, and irritatingly confident. "Are you feeling better now?" she asked as though nothing had happened. "Yes," I replied softly. "Much better, actually. I've been doing some cleaning." "Oh, that's good. You've always been so sentimental with your things." I smiled to myself. If only she knew what I'd found. The real cleaning had nothing to do with dust or old boxes. It was about clarity, about peeling away every false layer they'd wrapped around me for years. The plan, if it could even be called that, grew naturally. I didn't draw blueprints or list steps. I just followed instinct. I began documenting everything: the letters, the dates, the money transfers, the texts. I even took photos of the walls before, and after removing the boards that had hidden their lies. Each piece was evidence, not for the police, but for truth itself. Then I reached out to people who had been quietly silenced: the caterers, the decorator, even the photographer. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had manipulated. She hadn't paid half of them. She'd used my name, my credibility, my kindness. One by one, they shared their stories: frustration, unpaid invoices, unanswered calls. And one by one, I recorded them, not for revenge, but for accountability. I started to realize that sometimes revenge doesn't look like fire or fury. It looks like truth illuminated in a room that's been dark for too long. A week later, I invited her to meet me. We chose a small cafe near the river, neutral ground. I sat by the window, watching people walk by, their laughter echoing faintly against the glass. I envied their simplicity, their freedom from this storm. When she arrived, she looked flawless, as always: perfectly styled hair, a white blazer that screamed control. Her smile was rehearsed. "Wow," she said, taking a seat across from me. "You look different, peaceful." "I am," I said quietly. We ordered coffee. I could feel her eyes studying me, looking for weakness. But I was done being fragile. "I wanted to thank you," I began. "For the wedding. For everything." Her brows arched. "Thank me? After everything that happened?" "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. "Because it opened my eyes." She laughed lightly, stirring her coffee. "You've always been too emotional. You take things personally." "Do I?" I asked, leaning slightly forward. "Then tell me, was it personal when you used my name to cover your debts? When you told people I mishandled the catering, so they blame me instead of you?" Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly, her tone shifting. "Then maybe you'll remember this." I pulled out a small folder from my bag and slid it across the table. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty before she opened it. The letters, the invoices, the photos. I watched the color drain from her face. "You went through my things?" she whispered. "I went through the truth," I replied. "And I think it's time others saw it too." She stared at me, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the pages. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled, not with cruelty, but with release. "You should know by now, I don't plan things. I just finish what others start." That meeting changed everything. The silence between us after that day was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She tried calling, texting, even visiting, but I didn't respond. Instead, I began to rebuild, not my reputation, but my sense of self. Word started to spread quietly through our community. People who had believed her version of the story began to see through it. Not because I shouted, but because I let truth speak louder than excuses. One afternoon, I received a message from one of the vendors, a woman named Clara who'd lost a lot of money because of my cousin's deceit. "I got my payment today," she wrote. "Anonymous transfer. I think she's trying to clean up her mess." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure whether to feel satisfied or sad. Maybe revenge wasn't about destroying someone. Maybe it was about forcing them to face the reflection they'd been avoiding. Weeks passed. The house felt different now, lighter. The same walls that once suffocated me now seemed to breathe again. I repainted the section where I had found the letters, sealing away the last remnants of their lies. But one night, as I was cleaning up, I found something tucked under a floorboard. A single photo, faded and torn. It was of us, me, my cousin, and our parents, taken years ago at a family gathering. We looked happy, innocent. For a moment, I felt a lump in my throat. Revenge may have brought closure, but it also burned away the last traces of innocence we once shared. I sat on the floor, holding the photo under the dim light. I didn't want this, I whispered to the empty room. I just wanted honesty. The truth is, I never set out to destroy her. I just wanted her to admit what she'd done. But in chasing that, I realized something even deeper. Sometimes justice and revenge walk a very thin line, and you don't always know which one you've crossed until it's too late. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name written in her handwriting. Inside was a single note. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it. No apology, no explanation, just a final, bitter acknowledgement. I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside the same folder that held her lies. Then I locked it away. That was the moment I finally felt peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped needing to. The revenge I never planned ended not with shouting or chaos, but with quiet acceptance. The truth had done what revenge never could. It set me free. The walls no longer whispered secrets. They simply stood there, silent witnesses to everything that had unfolded. And as I stepped outside that morning, the sun warming my face, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes letting go is the loudest form of justice. The morning after I locked the folder away, something about the air felt different. Maybe it was lighter, or maybe I just was. The sunlight spilled through the front windows, painting long golden stripes across the floor. It felt like the house was exhaling with me, a quiet, gentle sigh of relief after years of holding its breath. For the first time in a long while, I walked through each room without feeling that sharp ache in my chest. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't filled with secrets or whispers. It was mine, calm, unbothered, alive in its stillness. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the same window where I had once watched the road with dread. Now, the road didn't frighten me. It simply existed, stretching out like a quiet reminder that life, no matter how broken, always moves forward. I took my first sip, the warmth spreading through my hands, and smiled to myself. The taste wasn't anything special, just ordinary tea, but it felt earned. It tasted like reclaiming something small and beautiful that I'd forgotten I had the right to enjoy. It was around mid-morning when I decided to do something I hadn't done since moving into the house. I opened all the windows. The old frames groaned in protest, but soon the rooms were filled with fresh air. The curtains fluttered like they were finally stretching after a long sleep. The scent of the outside, damp grass, lilac from the neighbor's yard, the faint smell of rain on distant pavement, drifted in, mixing with the faint sweetness of the candles I'd left burning the night before. I walked barefoot from room to room, feeling the texture of the wooden floor under my feet. Every creak felt like a conversation, the kind you have with a friend you finally understand. In the kitchen, I found a half-finished project from months ago, a jar of paintbrushes, a blank canvas propped against the counter. I remembered how I'd once promised myself I'd paint something for the living room, but life had become too loud, too complicated. Now, for the first time, the idea didn't feel ridiculous. I pulled the canvas closer, dusted off the surface, and set it near the window. The morning light hid it perfectly. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not grand gestures or perfect moments, but quiet choices that made the world feel a little softer again. By afternoon, I decided to rearrange the furniture, not to erase memories, but to claim the space differently. The couch that had once faced the wall where I'd found the hidden letters, I turned it toward the window instead. The table where I'd once laid out those painful notes, I cleared it, polished it, and placed a small vase of daisies in the center. It was strange, almost poetic, how changing the direction of a few things made the whole house feel new. I didn't notice the hours passing until I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, hands on my hips, breathing hard from moving things around. A small laugh escaped me, the kind of laugh that feels foreign at first after years of silence, but soon becomes familiar again. I realized then that this house, once filled with deceit and confusion, had become something else entirely, a canvas for my peace. That evening, I took a walk outside. The sky was soft with streaks of orange and lavender. The street lights were just beginning to hum awake. Neighbors passed me by, people I'd seen 100 times, but never really spoken to. An elderly woman from 2 houses down waved. I'd seen her often, always tending her rose bushes. "You've been busy today," she called out with a smile. "I guess I have," I replied, feeling oddly proud. "You should come by sometime," she said. "I make the best lemon cake in the neighborhood." I laughed softly. "I might just take you up on that." As I continued down the block, I realized how much I had withdrawn from everything. The people, the neighborhood, the simple rhythm of everyday life. I'd been living in the same place, but never really in it. Now, I wanted to change that. When I returned home, twilight had settled in. The house glowed softly through the windows, warm and inviting. For a moment, I stood on the porch, just looking at it, this place that had once been my burden but was slowly becoming my sanctuary. I stepped inside, and it welcomed me with the faint scent of vanilla from the candles still flickering on the table. I walked to the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, and opened an old photo album I'd found earlier while cleaning. The photos inside were old, some fading at the edges. They told stories of simpler times, birthdays, Sunday dinners, laughter that didn't hide anything. But instead of feeling pain, I felt gratitude. Those memories were still mine. They existed outside of the chaos that came later. It hit me then. This house didn't need to be haunted by what happened. It could be a keeper of both pain and peace. I could let both exist without one erasing the other. The next few days, I built new routines. Every morning, I'd make tea and sit by the window, watching the world slowly come alive, kids waiting for the school bus, the mail truck pulling up, the rhythm of normal life returning like a melody I'd forgotten. Some afternoons, I'd paint, not masterpieces, just colors and shapes that made sense only to me. Sometimes, I'd talk to the elderly neighbor, who always seemed to have a new story about her late husband or her garden. And every night, I'd light a candle in the living room before bed. It wasn't about ritual or memory. It was about light, a small, steady reminder that darkness could be softened, not feared. One afternoon, as I was painting, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a familiar face stood there, Clara, the vendor I had helped months earlier. She held a box of cupcakes, smiling shyly. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "not just for helping me get paid, but for standing up, for yourself, and for people like me who couldn't." I blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted gently. "It's rare to see someone fight quietly but still make an impact." She handed me the box and started to leave, but I stopped her. "Wait, would you like some tea?" Her face brightened. "I'd love that." We spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing, work, family, the weird weather. For the first time in years, I shared my home with someone without feeling the need to hide anything. When she left, I realized something simple but profound. Connection heals faster than isolation ever could. Later that week, I received a letter from my cousin's mother, my aunt. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation either. Just a short note. "Sometimes we hurt the ones who make us feel small. I'm sorry you had to carry that weight." There were no signatures, No promises, no invitations to reconnect. But it was enough. I read it once, then tucked it into a drawer, not with the folder of lies, but with the photo I'd found earlier. It belonged in a different category. Not guilt, not grief, just quiet understanding. One night, rain began to fall, the heavy kind that drums against the roof and fills the air with the scent of earth. I turned off all the lights and sat on the couch, watching the droplets race down the window pane. It reminded me of every storm I'd weathered, inside and out. And yet, instead of fear, I felt calm. The sound of rain didn't echo anymore. It harmonized. The walls didn't hold secrets. They simply absorbed the rhythm. I realized then, I didn't just live in this house. I lived with it. We had both been broken, both rebuilt piece by piece. The next morning, the world outside sparkled with the freshness that only follows rain. The grass was greener, the air crisp. I opened the door and stepped outside barefoot, feeling the coolness beneath my feet. I took a deep breath and looked back at the house. The paint gleamed faintly in the sun. The windows reflected blue sky instead of shadows. It finally felt like mine, not because I owned it, but because I belonged in it. I didn't need to run anymore. I didn't need to prove or fix or hide. The walls stood, silent but strong, holding memories without judgment. And as I sat on the porch with my tea, watching the world move quietly around me, I thought, maybe home isn't about walls or roofs or furniture. Maybe it's the space where your soul finally feels safe enough to rest. That night, before going to bed, I wrote something in my journal, a sentence that came to me without effort, one that finally captured what I had been trying to understand for months. Peace isn't found when the noise stops. It's found when you stop needing to listen for it. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and smiled in the dark. For the first time in years, the silence was not something to escape. It was a lullaby, gentle, forgiving, entirely mine. It's been a year now since that night, the night I finally stopped listening for echoes and started listening to myself. The house stands the same, quiet and modest, sitting at the end of Maple Drive, where the wind carries the smell of lilacs every spring. But it feels different now. Maybe it's me. Maybe healing doesn't change what surrounds you. It just changes what you see when you look at it. Every scar on the wall, every uneven board in the hallway, every soft hum of the heater at night, they use to remind me of fear. Now, they remind me of endurance, of what it means to stay when everything in you wants to run. I've stopped expecting life to give me answers neatly tied in bows. Instead, I've learned to sit with the questions, to find beauty in the quiet uncertainty that once terrified me. Sometimes, I still catch myself standing by the window when the sun sets, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn. But it's no longer out of habit or anxiety, it's appreciation. I think of the woman I was when I first stepped foot into this house, the one who thought secrecy could protect her heart. She was fragile, desperate for control in a world that never promised any. But she fought her way through every truth, every betrayal, and every lonely night until she built peace from her own pain. And now I can finally say this house isn't haunted, not by strangers, not by lies, not by who I used to be. It's filled with laughter from the neighbor who drops off lemon cake, with faint brush strokes from my half-finished paintings, and with the quiet sound of my own steady breathing when I fall asleep at night. Sometimes I wonder if my husband ever found out about the house, about the secrets, about what became of me. But the thought doesn't sting anymore. It doesn't even linger, because I've learned that closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from peace. And peace, I've realized, doesn't shout. It whispers. The home I bought in silence became the place where I finally heard myself again. And if anyone ever asks what I learned from all of it, the lies, the fear, the isolation, the revenge I never planned, I'd tell them this. You don't find home by running from ghosts. You find it by facing them, forgiving yourself, and staying long enough to see the morning light hit the same walls that once scared you. Because sometimes the scariest place in the world becomes the safest once you decide it's yours.